Hey everybody, welcome to the RFP Success Show. I am your host, Lisa Reherick, the #1 sought after authority on RFP success. And we are on to part 2 with Sandra Younger. Last week we talked to her about writing and we started diving a little bit into storytelling. And if you didn't listen to that, please go back and listen to that episode because it was so fantastic. Sandra is amazing. She's got an amazing book out there called The Fire Outside My Window. It has been a #1 bestseller on Amazon a few different times throughout its life cycle, and it's a really phenomenal book telling the story of how Sandra and her family had to escape the cedar fire in California. So you want to go back and you want to get that book, first of all, but you want to go back and listen to that episode. We dive a little bit deeper into that book. But she's an amazing writer. She's a journalism and English. She has degrees in journalism and English. She's been a reporter, magazine editor, and author, and she's just amazing. So we talked a lot about writing, and now we're going to talk about storytelling. So Sandra, welcome back.
Thank you, Lisa. Good to be back. It was fun last time, huh?
I know, it was so fun, and I feel Sandra and I could talk for hours and hours, and so we were just...
But we actually made writing fun.
Yes, it's all about fun. And what was the quote that you said was so me, something about a shitty writer?
Oh, yes. The writer's first job is to create a shitty first draft.
I love that quote so much.
Yes.
So for all of you who get in your head about overwriting and overthinking that it's got to be perfect right out of the gate, that was probably one of my biggest takeaways from the first episode, is to, you've got to do it in some different steps so that you let yourself off the hook a little bit. You take the pressure off. And she also gave a ton of really great tips. So you want to go back to that.
But, yeah. And I want to give credit for that quote to Anne Lamott. That is her quote. Not
Anne Lamott. That's awesome. So when we were talking about writing, one of the things that was a common theme throughout our conversation was storytelling. Stories. Yes. And this is really where Sandra's expertise shines. Well, she's amazing all the way around, but this is really an area that she is amazing at. And it's interesting. I was having a conversation with some colleagues a couple of days ago, and I was telling them, that RFP responses need to have more stories and need to weave storytelling. And they were asking me, like, how do you do that when you're responding to something around financial auditing? Where it's really dry. So we're going to talk to you all about this. And I want you to think about, yes, it might sound more like it's just for the creatives, but this flows all the way through. I don't care if you're writing technical. I don't care if you're writing a novel. This storytelling is very important. So would you agree with that, Sandra?
Oh, 1,000%. Yeah.
Okay. So what is storytelling?
What is storytelling? It's just sharing pieces of our lives and experiences. It's sharing pieces of others. A story is just a little snippet of somebody's experience that is captured and then shared. So we talk about storytelling. We always also talk about story catching. And the reason it's so powerful is because this is what distinguishes, one of the main things that distinguishes Homo sapiens from other creatures is that we capture these little pieces of our experience here, and we learn from them and we share them. And I like to say that stories are the cultural currency of our lives, because this is how, long before we had any other forms of communication, certainly long before social media screwed us up, right. We had, right? We transmitted knowledge and wisdom, life-saving knowledge and wisdom from one generation to another, from one person to another, through storytelling. We'd sit around the campfire, literally cave people sitting around telling stories. And, you see those cave paintings that date back up to 40,000 years ago. That's storytelling, Lisa. We don't think about it. But, if you've got a picture of those little stick figures that you see, and they've got their arms up like, or they've got a spear like that. And then you see a picture of a little stick-legged antelope, and either the the stick human is chasing the antelope or running from
Right.
something scary. But whatever, there's a story going on there. So we
Yeah.
are creatures of story right down to our DNA. We process everything through this neural net. Well, I'm getting ahead of us, but we process everything through a neural net in our brains that is basically a story format. Everything that we experience and we learn and we see, we filter that through a story filter.
So that's all good and well when we're thinking about a novel or thinking about you and I sitting down and saying, "Hey, what have you been up to?" Yada yada yada. But
Yeah.
technical writing, really? And I'm being a little tongue in cheek here, right?
I know. Well, okay, but so here's the thing: is that who creates technology? People. Are there stories that happen in the creation, in the production, in the sharing of that technology? Yes, because who's involved? People. So again, if you think of stories as just being a captured moment or a captured segment of an experience that is worth sharing with others, that others can derive knowledge or meaning from, then everything is built on stories. And we have
True.
some celebrated examples of this. We have the story of Steve Jobs and his quest to be relevant and create things, and how at one point he was fired from his own company, and his friends came in and found him curled up in the fetal position on a bare mattress on the floor, and he managed to come back from that. And after that, we got the iPhone and the iPad and all of this stuff. We have stories that are a part of the development and the popularization of technology. Now, I don't think you want to tell your fetal position story in an RFP, but everything is based on stories. And if you can find ways to insert the stories that are already there about your technology and why it's so great and how it solves issues. And by the way, the issues are also stories. People's needs and pain points are stories, right? So if you can find ways to put that in there, it will give people a handle to remembering all the techie stuff. If we don't have a story, we don't have any way to grab it. I mean, think about if you were trying to pick up your suitcase and there was no handle on it. It's so awkward. You can't pick it up. You can't carry it very far. That's what stories do for facts and figures. They give us a way into them, a way to be engaged in them, and a way to make sense of them, and a way to remember them. So you can't really be a successful technical communicator, even between technical audiences, unless there's some piece of story to create that handle for people.
Yeah, it's so true, because if you think about the whole iPhone, if I go to buy an iPhone, I care about the technical specs at some point, but to get me in the door, to get me attached to wanting to know more and to pay attention to the technical specs, the story is what draws me in.
Yeah.
Right? And everybody, I want you to pay attention in last episode and this episode, as Sandra's talking, she uses a lot of metaphors, and it makes things so much more interesting and so much more relatable and grab holdable, right? That suitcase metaphor that you used.
Yes.
So even think about that, I think, in the writing, is those metaphors are telling a story, right?
Yeah, I'm glad you pointed that out, because storytelling is a very broad, it's a very broad term, and a metaphor is a type of story. Because when I give you the suitcase metaphor, in your head, you're going through this little movie, right? You have this little movie in your head. Oh gosh, the handle fell off my suitcase. So what am I going to do? I got to pick it up, and how am I going to get it? And it weighs a ton, and my plane is taking off in 5 minutes, and I still got to get through TSA. We start to think of all these things in our heads. We play this little scenario out. That's story, right?
And we can visualize it, right? So that's
We can
something
visualize
that I can visualize
the mental
versus
movie, right? The
just
mind
telling
movie.
me. Yeah, if you're just telling me, well, this is really hard to grab a hold of, and this is a hard concept, and blah, 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 whatever, I can't visualize that, so I can't you know, so maybe I'm doing my grocery list in my head while I'm reading the rest of that because it's so boring. But if
Yep.
you're telling me that story about the suitcase, I'm visualizing, I'm emotionally connected.
Yes, a story can come out of something as simple as a metaphor or a simile, which is when we say it's like this, it's like that.
Mm,
It doesn't have to be
analogies
a
that I think.
full-blown novelette within an RFP. It can be a reference to something that people have connotations about. There was a
Yeah.
great, okay, I'm going to tell another little story. There was a great Star Trek episode from the original Star Trek, right, with
Yeah.
James Kirk, and it was about their encounter with some other planet and some other civilization, and they had to learn their language, and their language was all based on metaphors. So they would say something, and
Oh,
I can't remember what it was. I know you're going to have somebody in your audience who's going to say, "Oh, of course, Sandra, it was this," but it
yeah.
was like Shaka, it was like Shaka when the walls fell down or something like that. And
Okay.
these people would say that to each other, and they knew exactly what they were talking about because it was a little
Ooh,
link to a story.
yeah.
Another metaphor, think about, when you hit this URL, it's not the whole page, but it's a link, it's a way into that page. So they had developed this sort of metaphorical language, and we do the same things. We have these sayings and these words that now we can use, and they're shortcuts for everything,
Yeah.
right?
Oh, I
Hashtags
love
are
that.
that. Now we can say,
Hashtags.
like,
Yes.
hashtag Sunday Fun Day or something, and then that tells a little story without your having to completely flesh it out. So there are
Yeah.
all kinds of ways you can insert little pieces of stories. You can either tell them outright, or you can give people a little hint that brings up a story that they already know that's in their head.
Yeah, so this is so good. This is great because, when I hear storytelling, and I'm sure a lot of the audience as well is thinking, oh my gosh, well, that's like, we only have 10 pages, or, a story. They're thinking big when they're thinking of a story, but you're
Mhm.
saying, no, it can be one little snippet. We're not saying, you guys, that you need to add hashtags to your RFP responses.
No, I'm not saying
Yeah,
that.
but you've got to get a little creative here. And how can you, again, kind of think of it, I'm thinking of it from a visual perspective, something that you can give somebody that they can really sink their teeth into. It can be one or two sentences, a short little metaphor or analogy, or so everybody that's listening, please don't think it's got to be this big huge novel, right?
Yeah. No, you want to
Yeah.
stay away from novels because people will get bored and say, okay, get to the point. What is she talking about?
Right, exactly.
Right? Yes.
So those are some different types of storytelling. Anything else? Are there any other different types of storytelling that we should address?
Well, there are three kinds of stories that I think every business should have.
Okay.
And the first is their signature story, I like to call it. There are lots of
Mm,
names for this story: core story, origin story. Um, if you're a solopreneur, it's probably your personal story of
yeah, your
how
passion.
you're what yeah, why you're passionate about what you're doing. When I've worked with solopreneurs, some of them have said to me, geez, for the first time, I really understand why I do what I do, because
Yeah,
we get into the nitty gritty of their life story, like what happened to you and how did you respond to that? Because most signature stories are really comeback stories.
right.
So they're about how someone met a need or overcame a challenge or hurdle. And most corporate stories are like that also in
I was
some.
just going to say that. Yeah, I mean, corporate
Yeah.
stories start from something like that a lot of times too.
Well, when you think about the fact that most organizations, either nonprofit or for profit, are meeting a need, well, a
Hmm.
need is a story. There's a story behind that need, right? So that's the first kind of story you want to tell: how you or your business got started. What made you want to fill this need? Why? How did you overcome this need or meet this need in your life? And that gives you credibility,
Yeah,
right? It does two things. It it gives you credibility because people know that, okay, this person has all the resume box checked, but
yep.
who are they really? I
Yeah,
like to think of it as if you were um, if you were interviewing 10 people and they're all standing on a stage and they're holding a big placard of their resume in front of them, they all look alike. But if one of them drops that placard and starts telling you their story, that's the one you pay attention to, right?
For sure.
So,
Yes.
so it builds credibility, but it also builds vulnerability. If you can be a little transparent, now I don't want any, like soap opera confessionals,
Right.
but if you can be a little transparent, like I was really struggling with this, or we saw people struggling with this, and so we created a solution. If you can be transparent about your own struggles, that's what builds credibility.
And that emotion.
The vulnerability builds credibility. And that's what Brene Brown has so brilliantly figured out in her clinical trials, is that vulnerability leads to success. Because if you just drop a little bit of your facade, we all like to look like we've got it all together, and we all know that we don't, right? So when somebody drops that facade and is open with you, then you think, oh, thank God they're a real person like me.
Yeah.
Right.
And a real company. And a real company, because I think there will definitely be listeners here going, well, we can't possibly do that. We're a corporation or we're a business. And I call bullshit on that. You can. It doesn't have to be, again, it doesn't have to be like, hey, I was broke 5 years ago and blah, blah, blah. But again, why did you start the business? What's the crux of the business? Why is everybody there? Why are people passionate about it? And that connects to that emotion we've talked about.
Exactly. The big question is always why. Why? And you keep asking why until you get to something that tugs at you a little bit on the heart. So that's just the first kind of story. But that is crucial. Like, you got to tell people why you do what you do, why you're so passionate about it, why you're capable of helping them, right? Because you figured it out. The second kind of story we talked about in the last episode is a case study, or I like to call it a sticky story. And it helps people remember what you're trying to say to them. We cannot remember stuff for long without a story. We just can't. That's the brain's suitcase handle, right?
Yep.
So you try to memorize a bunch of facts and figures, and it won't stick in your head for very long unless it's somehow all that stuff is woven into a story. Then we can remember it. So when you tell a sticky story or a case study, it illustrates either the points you're trying to teach someone, if that's your service, or the features of your products. What the benefits, let's not say features, the benefits of your product when it comes to solving a need. So, or a pain, meeting the pain points that your people have. And again, you have to know your audience, you have to know what their pain points are. So you tell a few case studies and you pick them, you pick the ones that are specific to the points you want to make and you want people to remember. So say if you're selling widget A and it makes your teeth whiter, you tell a story about poor Joe Blow who couldn't get a date because he had yellow teeth and now he's, the most popular guy in town, something like that. I mean, that's just corny. All right. So but it makes the point. So the third kind of story you tell is you tell, it's a little subtle, but a subtle difference. You tell your success stories. So I guess the one I just did was probably more of a success story than a case study that's proving a point. But you got to have other people besides you say, yeah, this is great, to create that credibility.
Yeah. And so would testimonials fall into that?
Yes, it's another word for success story, is testimonial. So the difference is that the sticky stories make your point and illustrate the benefits of your product that don't have to be connected with a happy user. It can be some other story. It can be a metaphor. Like if you're trying to teach a certain principle, if that's part of your service, you could use another story that's not, you could tell a fable or something.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be your story.
It doesn't have to be a user story or your personal story. It can be anything. But the testimonials or success stories do need to be about people who have found that, hey, this works for them too. And those are I structure those in a very specific way, and that shows the before and after.
Yeah, I love that too. And I think, something that I tell my people all the time is you've got to substantiate your claims. Like you can't just say, hey, we're really good at this. We are amazing.
Right.
We're the best.
Right. And the best way to substantiate your claims is having other people vouch for you.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. And preferably somebody that your audience is going to respect, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Great point. Great point. Well, this has been so phenomenal. Like I said, I think you and I could talk for 2 hours straight and never get to the bottom of everything. But some really great golden nuggets here for everybody. And I really encourage my listeners to think about how this applies. If you're feeling like this doesn't apply to you, bullshit. It does. You just have to find a way to make it work for your environment. I love to call bullshit on stuff when we're in our own heads, right?
So there's one more piece we should talk about if we have a minute.
Sure. Okay, let's do it.
Really quick, because the key to making any story work is the structure of the narrative arc. And think of it like a roller coaster. Like you're eking up to the top and you're feeling the tension, what's happening. And then you get to the top and there's this point where you sort of waver a little bit and then whoosh, you go down. That is essentially what we call the narrative arc. You build to a climax, and the climax is an all is lost moment where it looks like, oh no, 007 is not going to get out of this one. This is the last James Bond movie, but amazingly, he does. And then you whoosh down to the conclusion, which is your happy solution that you offer. We know from scientific research that that particular structure causes people to trust you. It causes an actual physiological release of oxytocin, which is the bonding hormone. So every story needs to have some aspect of the narrative arc in there when things build to a climax and all is lost moment and then come to resolution.
I love that. And I'm envisioning not just in the stories that we're telling, but, in an RFP response, you don't always have control over that throughout the whole environment or the whole response. But in an executive summary, you absolutely do.
That's the perfect place to use it. Yep.
Love that.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, good. I'm so glad you brought that up. So thank you for interjecting that. All right, great. Miss Sandra. So how can people get in touch with you? Tell us more about how they can find you.
People can just email me directly, Sandra@sandrayounger.com. That's pretty simple. Sandra@sandrayounger.com. Just email me. I will get it and I will answer you if you're interested in scheduling some story workshops for your team or you'd like to work on your own strategic story. We can talk about that.
I love it. She's brilliant at it. She's helped me with my own strategic story, so I know her brilliance.
Oh, you have such a great story, and you didn't even realize what a great story it was.
That's the brilliance of you, right? Is that I was like, well, my life has been pretty awesome and amazing, and I don't really have anything horrible or I don't know. It was one of those things I didn't think I had a story, but she found my story, and it's amazing.
People say that. They say, I don't think I have a story. Who's going to care about my story? It's so boring. Or my story's too messy to tell. We can deal with all of that.
All of the above. So I love that. And if you need writing workshops or one-on-one writing help, any of that, reach out to her. And also, how can they find your book? Because we've talked a lot about your book, The Fire Outside My Window. It's a great book. And where can they find that? On Amazon?
Well, sure. It's on Amazon. You can just do a search either by my name. My author name is Sandra Millers Younger, so it might be easier to look for The Fire Outside My Window on Amazon. Also, if you know anyone who has been affected by a natural disaster, especially a wildfire, they can find a complimentary copy of my guidebook for personal resilience in the aftermath of disaster. It's called the Comeback Formula, and it's available at comebackformula.com. Comeback, COMEBACK, formula.com for a free copy of my best advice for disaster survivors. And the book again is The Fire Outside My Window, or you can just email me, Sandra@sandrayounger.com, to ask any questions about any of that.
Awesome. And we'll have all that information in the show notes for everybody as well. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Sandra, for being here. It was such a pleasure to talk with you as always, but to share you with my guests.
No, thank you, Lisa. They are so lucky to have you as a
Oh, thank
consultant
you.
and guide.
Thank you, my friend. All right, everybody, you've been listening to the RFP Success Show. If you like what you're hearing, subscribe, leave a review, share with your colleagues. Until the next time, we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.